The Deltarune community is split. See, since Chapter 1, we've known that Noelle is extremely interested in getting closer with Susie. In Chapter 1, Chris and Susie become fully fledged friends, and Noelle asks Chris about Susie, what kind of a person she is, stuff like that. Chapter 2 teases this relationship a lot more, confirming that this isn't just a little teaser or silly fanfiction material. Noelle's interest in getting close to Susie seems to be part of her story in the game, a crucial part of her character arc. The Ferris wheel scene in Chapter 1 is one of my favorite parts of the entire game, and afterwards I said to myself, darn, I want a whole game of just Susie and Noelle, so that kinda tells you how I feel about it. That being said, it seems like a large amount of Deltarune fans believe that Noelle's interest in Susie is toxic. People have claimed that she's obsessive even. If you're part of the online Deltarune community, you've definitely seen how in every discussion about this relationship, which I'll call Suzel, there's always a person claiming that it's toxic. And I've seen so much fighting over this that I feel like making a video on it. My name is Spookydood, make sure to like and subscribe. Now let's discuss. To start this video off, I want to say this isn't a weird rage bait rant about how toxic Noelle is, nor is it a whiny rant about the evil fan base or anything like that. As much as this topic has generated a lot of discourse with the sole aim of arguing, I've seen people genuinely interpreting Deltarune in a way that they believe Suzel is being portrayed as a toxic ship. And that's why I want to provide an actual analysis of the text and whether or not it's trying to portray the relationship as toxic. I've seen discussions about this on social media, and people get genuinely upset at those who believe it would be more interesting if they didn't get together. And I mean, come on guys, that's stupid. Don't get mad at others over fictional romances. If people are being bigoted in some way, or if the relationship they believe should happen is problematic, then okay, that's totally different. But someone simply believing that any given fictional romance isn't good or fun, or would be more interesting if it fell apart, it's totally fine, it's just their opinion. Even if someone believes Suzel is toxic, there's no reason to get genuinely upset. Everyone reads and interprets fiction differently, and as long as an interpretation isn't hurting anyone, I don't see the problem with people reading things one way or another. So, with that being said, is Suzel toxic? And this is where I already have to take my first detour, because I think it's important. I said I want to see whether Deltarune is trying to portray the relationship as toxic, because that's the most important thing. Is Deltarune trying to portray the relationship as toxic? People like to apply a real-world system of ethics and morals to every piece of fiction, and doing so actively muddies the message that it's trying to send. Do you like Cloud Strife from Final Fantasy VII? Well, guess what? He's killed tens of thousands of people. Okay, let me give you this one. Ready? There are two co-workers. One is always trying to make everybody's day brighter. The other is a depressed person who lives kind of a less good life and is always mean to that first co-worker, always calling him names, saying awful things to him, hurting him even, going out of his way to try and make his day miserable. Is that abusive? Well, if it was the real world, yes, but I'm talking about Squidward and SpongeBob. Is Squidward abusive because he's always mean to SpongeBob? No, we know that's not really the case. In the same way that faces and poses and drama and action are exaggerated in media, the same goes for character relationships. What's most important is what the media itself is trying to say about the characters and their relationship. The message of the media, in my opinion, usually takes precedent over real-life analysis. Now, that's not to say this is always the case. There are, in fact, times when fiction, even if it's trying to say one thing, ends up actually saying something that's objectively wrong. Certain famous authors who, I'm not going to name names, but they've been recently discussed as having certain races of characters contain certain traits in their books that are negative. That's a completely fair analysis and definitely not what I'm talking about. What I'm saying is, if a piece of media wants to portray a message through character relationships, real-life morals can't truly be applied 100%. However, there are indeed times in which harmful messages should be called out. I don't think this is the most controversial belief, and this concept needs to be applied to the whole Suzel discussion. 90% of the people arguing that Noelle's feelings are toxic or obsessive are analyzing Noelle in the context of real life. Yes, you are correct. The amount of times Noelle talks or makes references to her crush on Susie is excessive, if it was in real life. Also, just an FYI, I knew people in middle to high school who talked about their crushes all day. That's like a normal thing for kids to do. But the fact is, it's at a video game, and that game needs to tell us information about the characters. You don't realize it, but 90% of any game, show, or movie involving any characters at all convey information to us in completely unrealistic ways. To quickly tell us everything we need to know about any specific character, games hammer certain character traits into our brains within minutes of showing us the character. Hey look, it's a nerdy scientist character, and within 4 minutes of seeing him he would have said things like, according to my calculations, and if we just move this doohickey over here, and hey guys, I'm drinking some H2O, that kind of stuff. It's over the top and exaggerated, but it's to let us know who this character is. Within a few minutes you'd be saying to yourself, yeah, this guy's a nerd. Look at Deltarune. Arguably, characters like Birdly, Caddy, Ralsei, etc. are explained very quickly by repeating character quirks. Sure, all these characters have deeper sides to them, however, in order to show you what's on the surface level, quirks are repeated and tropes are played into. In this way, Noelle's interest in Susie is simply a character trait Toby needs to make sure we fully understand. Sure, Noelle consistently hints at her feelings, however without those moments we wouldn't know. If we only had that brief moment in Chapter 1 that kind of hints at it, it wouldn't feel like a fully fleshed out part of her character. Characters aren't real people, they're more like mini books, books that you need to write. Noelle's interest in Susie is clearly a core part of her existence in Deltarune, in the same way Alphys and Undyne's feelings were in Undertale. Like I said, characters are stories and statements rather than real people. Squidward and SpongeBob have a good relationship, both really admire each other and are even able to call each other friends. However, if they were real people, Squidward would absolutely earn the label of abusive. However, the show consistently makes the statement that Squidward's actions towards SpongeBob aren't truly the core of their relationship. Underneath everything, Squidward does like SpongeBob. These moments throughout the show that reveal this truth consistently remind you that Squidward and SpongeBob's relationship, despite seeming abusive on paper, isn't actually abusive as it's not a real-life relationship. Apply this to Deltarune. Noelle talks frequently about Susie in a positive light, displays the desire to be bossed around by Susie, wants to get shoved up against a locker. However, these things aren't meant to be taken literally. Noelle doesn't literally want to get bullied, she is falling for Susie's personality type, as it clearly complements her own. So, with these preliminary statements out of the way, let's actually analyze the relationship. What are the complaints against Suzelle? 1. Noelle is obsessed with Susie to the point where it's all she talks about. 2. Noelle is jealous and creepily attached to Susie, making her uncomfortable. 3. This relationship in general is abusive. Let's start with number 1. I already gave my basic thoughts on this before. Noelle talks about Susie a lot, but as I said, this behavior shouldn't be labeled as obsessive. This is a character trait that the game needs to communicate to us. The true question should revolve around the proportion of time Noelle spends discussing Susie compared to her total screen time. And when you actually think about that, things change drastically. I was going to give examples of a few conversations where Noelle doesn't even mention Susie, but after looking at the game, I realized there are far too many. Most of the city walk-around with Noelle has her talking with Chris about other things, about the city itself, about their past together, about inside jokes, deaths, etc. One of Noelle's deepest character moments is when she talks to Chris about deaths, bringing up the story of how the Des, Noelle, Chris, and Azriel group would go exploring together. This isn't a character who's obsessed. Plus, her interactions with Susie are always lighthearted and fun. The Ferris wheel scene, too, is a deep character discussion, with Noelle talking about why she's even nervous around Susie in the first place. Noelle thinks Susie is cool because she's willing to break the rules. Where Noelle is scared of others, it seems to her like Susie isn't. She's willing to do crazy things. If a character is obsessed in a piece of fiction, you'll know. Like I said, fiction takes its time to try and, show you immediately what's the dynamic with this character, what's the relationship here. And if someone is obsessed, chances are the game won't take 7 chapters to get that fact out there. You'll know immediately, and the game itself will say, hey, this character's obsessed, not just, your own personal interpretation. I don't think Deltarune is portraying Suzelle as obsessive yet. I think that what it's doing is showing us Noelle clearly cares about Susie very, very much, but it's not obsessive, and it's not portraying her thoughts in a negative light. The second main argument is that she's creepily attached to Susie, making Susie uncomfortable. And that, I think, is completely wrong. Look at Susie's dialogue. She goes out of her way to explain that she's been nice to Noelle because she noticed her smile on the first day of school. One of their last interactions is Susie saying they should hang out outside of the Dark Worlds. Even after that, Susie talks about what Noelle would like before questioning why she's thinking about Noelle. If Susie was creeped out, she wouldn't ask to hang out with Noelle or be thinking about her positively after the events of Chapter 2. I think this argument is just outright wrong. You have to understand Susie's arc here. In the beginning of chapter 1, Susie was super standoffish. She had no friends. She had nobody who liked her. It's implied she has a horrible or even no home life. Becoming friends with Chris and Rousey was a life-changing thing for her. For Noelle to not only want to be friends with her, but to be way more into her than Chris or Rousey, for reasons you and I understand but Susie doesn't, it's shocking for her. She clearly doesn't entirely know how to react or how to interpret the situation, but the farthest thing from the truth is that Susie's uncomfortable. Finally, we get to the last main argument, that the relationship in general is abusive, or will be abusive by default. And that, I think, is an argument worth taking a look at. See, here's the thing. This argument is full of flanderization and misinterpretation. Noelle is seen by some sides of the fanbase as a pushover, clingy, obsessive, etc. Susie is seen as cold, mean, and rude, constantly making, mean jokes to the other characters. Many say that by default, Noelle, who's a complete pushover, getting into even a friendship with Susie would be abusive, as Susie's attitude would lead to Noelle getting pushed around. This also is used in an argument that I see a lot, which is that Noelle actively goes towards that kind of abuse, wanting to be pushed around, desiring to be the one Susie shoved in a locker, etc. And this is where I have to step in and say, hold up. The entire point of Noelle's arc in Chapter 2 is her finally standing up for herself, acknowledging that she needs to be stronger in the sense that she must be able to say no to people, and she finally does. By the end of Chapter 2, she's gotten stronger. No, not that kind of stronger. Stronger mentally. This is the quality she literally admires Susie for. She says that Susie's brave and willing to do whatever. This isn't a case of a pushover finding comfort in a life they've lived their entire lives. This is the case of someone finding strength through a friend and helping themselves become a stronger person, able to say no and stand up for herself after being inspired by Susie. Also, I kind of feel like mentioning, Susie clearly has a lot more character stuff to get through. We got that surface level angst in Chapter 1, however it's been made clear Susie has a long way to go. That being said, the way she's portrayed in Chapter 1 is completely different than the way she acts in Chapter 2. This character is the same as this character, and that's hard to believe. Susie in Chapter 2 has opened up, has become less mean. Her jokes are less mean and more funny mean. Even when she says things that slightly cross a line in real life, the game makes sure to show you it's all in good fun. I don't think any two characters are automatically incompatible, unless you're Asgore and Toriel, of course, but all jokes aside, seeing two completely different characters with different personalities fall in love is much more fun than watching two identical characters fall in love. At that point, why bother? What's the point of portraying a relationship, romantic, friendly, whatever, if the two characters are the exact same? Both Susie and Noelle have things to work on, but they're both just people. Sure, they've got different personalities, but if Chapter 2 and the Ferris wheel scene is any indication, their friendship, and whatever it eventually turns into, isn't automatically toxic or abusive. As I said before, Deltarune would go out of its way to portray if a relationship or friendship was toxic or abusive. After all, Noelle is involved with an abusive relationship on the Snowgrave route, and this is clearly portrayed to us, and the romantic subtext that's present throughout the route is also clearly shown in a negative, toxic way. This is what a toxic relationship between two characters would look like. This is how Deltarune would handle such a thing. So, in conclusion, Noelle isn't obsessive, toxic, or anything like that. Her constantly talking about Susie is simply a consequence of Deltarune being a video game that needs to fully explain her character to us in a very short amount of time. Similarly, both Noelle and Susie are good people, and in no way is their current friendship, or whatever it may turn into, abusive. That being said, I understand why some people may see it that way. However, I think it's mostly tied to reading the narrative in a way that only makes sense in real life. My name is Spookydood, make sure to like and Wait a minute. Why is there more video? Here's the thing. This is only one of two arguments that fans make when it comes to Suzelle. Many believe that it's toxic, right? But many more believe that it shouldn't and won't be an endgame relationship. That somehow, over the course of Deltarune, one or the other will shoot this notion down, or that Toby simply wouldn't go through with it. So, rather than end this video with the non-answer of, no, they're not abusive, but I can see why others would see it that way, I think I'm going to get my prediction brain out and discuss whether or not Suzelle will ever happen, and if it should. So, with that being said, what are the arguments against Suzelle happening in Deltarune? 1. It's too similar to Undyne and Alphys, and Toby wouldn't do the same thing twice. 2, it's boring. 3, it would be far more interesting if it didn't happen, or if this relationship instead turned completely toxic on one end. Now these are interesting, right? Let's talk about that first one, I think. I understand where the comparisons come from between Susie and Noelle with Undyne and Alphys. A strong, brave, fearless character with a huge heart deep down inside, and another shy, nerdy character. Sounds like Suzel, right? But I think it's clear that both of these characters are very different than Undyne or Alphys. Sure, vague descriptors do seem to match up, however, once you try describing them in detail, you realize they're very different. Besides the general differences between them, their deeper character traits are way different. Susie's personal life, Noelle's sister and personal issues, it's completely different than Undyne and Alphys. I'm not doing a very great job at describing them. I know for a fact someone could do a much better job diving deep into these characters and their differences. I think it's safe to say, though, that they are indeed very different. I think this belief comes from the fact that, yeah, if you look at Suzel in kind of a vague way, you can say, hey, wait a minute, this is similar to Alphys and Undyne. And technically, yeah, like I said, they are similar in terms of their broadest descriptors. But I feel like the misconception with this idea comes from the fact that Undyne and Alphys was a silly side story that, while yes, slightly dipped its toes into deeper character stuff, the majority of it was jokey and silly and fun. Honestly, I think that the deepest moment it ever got in the game ends with Alphys being thrown in a trash can and Papyrus jogging. So, you know, there's that. In that way, if Suzel ends up becoming a side thing that's silly and fun, I can see why people would compare it to Undyne and Alphys, not because of bigotry, though I'm sure some people are indeed just being assholes, but instead because if it ends up being totally silly side stuff, then it most likely won't cut deep with either character at a deeper level, therefore ending up with it reflecting the vague, broadest version of these characters possible. That being said, if you look at the Ferris wheel scene and the general way Deltarune feels and is progressing, I don't know how you could possibly believe that's the case. This relationship, whether they're friends or something else, is clearly going to continue throughout the rest of the game, and we can see that in the one scene they had that was really meaningful. This relationship made it way past that silly side level and cut through both characters, showing us the realest, deepest look at either character we've seen so far, particularly Noelle. It is my belief that this relationship will be unique, not just because Susie and Noelle are different characters than Undyne and Alphys, but because this is more of a main story thing that will influence the stories of both characters. These next 2 points kind of flow together here. That it's boring, and that it'd be more interesting if this relationship failed or became completely toxic. Now, I know you guys are smart. I'm going to give you guys a lot of credit, and I'm going to do so when it comes to what I'm about to say. Please try to understand the point I'm making here. I agree with the statement that conflict is inherently more interesting than people getting along. But that's solely based on their relationship right now and the way fiction works in general. In any piece of fiction, 2 characters fighting with one another is inherently more interesting than them just not fighting. Conflict in any piece of media presents us with 2 sides, arguments that are presented. You know, you wouldn't have superhero movies without someone for them to fight, you know what I mean? And I think that when you apply that kind of thinking to Suzel, it's like, well, what's more interesting? Them being silly and fun together or them fighting? And it's like, sure, in that way, right, I understand where you're coming from. You know, Susie and Noelle getting along, as I stated before, runs the risk of falling into silly side content territory. And that's why I think a lot of people are against them getting together, because of the status of their relationship right now. See, right now, Susie and Noelle aren't doing any really deep soul searching or anything. Both have silly, only positive feelings for each other that are mostly flavor text, despite a few scenes of, you know, relative importance. If Suzel were to happen in-game and continued exactly as it is right now with minimal changes, which is just silly, funny dialogue and positive feelings on both ends, then yes, that's largely boring. If I had to choose between Suzel staying exactly as it is right now, without any deeper introspection on Noelle or Susie, or for it to turn toxic and one of them to turn the other down, purely in terms of what would be more interesting, I'd choose option B. But that's natural. Conflict, like I said, is automatically more interesting than peace. It doesn't matter what the question is here. Would I rather that Gaster to be a friend or an enemy? For Asriel to come back home friendly and smiling, or brooding and hiding dark feelings? I'll always choose the side that brings more conflict and, in turn, interesting narrative possibilities with it. So is that it? Am I saying I hope that Suzel becomes toxic? No, because here's the thing. We're at chapter 2 of 7 and maybe more. Their relationship is going to evolve. Just because conflict is inherently more interesting than a lack thereof, doesn't mean that two characters who aren't conflicting with each other can't be taken to that same level of interest. Sure, characters who like each other and aren't fighting isn't inherently interesting. However, the second that they, as a duo, face conflict together is when suddenly that interest is there. While they won't conflict with each other, that interest will be found in how their relationship holds a magnifying glass up to them as characters, as well as how it continues to affect them throughout the story. Sure, right now it's mostly silly and fun, but character arcs aren't called arcs for no reason. The place they're at right now is a high point, but I have a feeling that both Susie and Noelle will experience hardships and triumphs throughout the game. Let's not kid ourselves, Rudy is most likely going to die. Whatever happens to Des will probably come to light. We'll have to deal with Mayor Holiday at some point. Noelle's life is going to get shaken around. Same with Susie. She's going to eventually learn these adventures she's been on and the friends she's made are all fake, something that the game wants us to know she doesn't realize yet. She's going to find out that Chris isn't even fully there and she's been hanging out with, well, us. She's going to confront the situation with her home life. Noelle and Susie are going to have to confront the darkest, worst parts of their lives, and yet through everything, if Suzelle is indeed endgame, they will have each other, and through that, they'll persevere. And in turn, you will find some interest there. I mean, the plot of Chapter 2 was largely run by Susie looking for Noelle. You know, that first scene, she immediately goes out of her way to, threaten the Queen. Like, that was Susie, right? I mean, and I think both of these characters and their complementary personalities are going to face hardships, and the relationship between them will change because of it. I doubt that Suzelle will be a silly, boring, unchanging thing once Rudy dies. When that happens, we'll see a completely different side of things. What Susie is like when it comes to confronting the death of a loved one. Who knows, maybe this is where she tells Noelle about her relationship with her parents. Maybe not. If Susie freaks out because all of her adventures have been fake in one way or another, there's one element that's not fake, that's been the most real connection she's made since the beginning, and that's Noelle. I see the potential here, for these two characters to go through conflict together, not have conflict with each other, to grow as people learning from one another. Just because what they're at right now isn't anything super engaging, doesn't mean it won't end up that way, and I think the relationship can be engaging even if they aren't turned against each other. So that's that. I don't think this relationship is toxic currently. I don't believe it will go that way, nor would I want it. However, I'm not going to lie and say that going that route is inherently bad or definitely cannot happen 100%. If that's what Toby wants to do, he'll do it. And maybe it'd be really good, I don't know. But based on what we're seeing currently, I don't think that's going to happen. I'd just like to add one more time, I don't think anyone should be harassing anyone based on their opinions. We're all fans of Deltarune, and as long as someone isn't being openly bigoted, I don't see the reason to get mad at them for having an opinion on the narrative. I've seen plenty of people who really want and think it would be good if Suzelle turned toxic, and, I'm sure there are some people that feel that way because of some kind of, bigotry, which is obviously wrong, but the people that I've seen it from are largely thinking about it from a narrative perspective, and I can't blame them or say, how dare you not want this fictional romance between two characters to, not happen. Whatever, it's not a big deal. So those are my thoughts. My name is Spookydood. Make sure to like and subscribe and follow me on Twitter. I really need more Twitter followers. We've been getting some banger tweets out this month. I've got a whole bunch of likes on one of them. I was so happy about that. I also put some of my crazier thoughts there. So yeah, I would appreciate if you followed me there. Anyway, thanks for watching.